A woman today will have around 400 periods in her life. A woman in the Stone Age had maybe 100. Some had far fewer than that. And here's the part that surprises people. It wasn't because anything was wrong with her. It wasn't bad nutrition or hardship or disease. It's that for almost the entire history of our species, a monthly period simply wasn't monthly. It was rare. You might think of the monthly cycle as a fixed fact of being a woman, that steady 28-day rhythm. On the scale of human history, it's brand new. So the real question isn't just, what did ancient women use? It's bigger than that. Why did they bleed so much less than we do? What did they actually reach for when they did? And why is it that we have their tools, their cave paintings, and their carefully buried dead, but almost nothing that tells us how half of every ancient population handled this? And I'll flag it plainly wherever the evidence is thin, because a lot of the confident-sounding claims about this fall apart the moment you check them. Let's start with the number, because the number changes everything. Think about a woman living today in a wealthy country. She might get her first period around age 12. She'll likely have 1 or 2 children, if any, later in life. She won't breastfeed each of them for very long, and she'll keep cycling month after month into her late 40s or early 50s. Add that up, and you land near 400 periods across a lifetime. Now picture a woman in a foraging band 20,000 years ago. Almost every one of those numbers is different, and every difference points the same way, toward fewer periods. We can actually check this because a small number of societies were still living by hunting and gathering into modern times, and anthropologists studied them carefully. The clearest picture comes from an American researcher named Beverly Strassmann, who spent 31 months living among the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa. They're farmers, not foragers, but they lived without modern birth control or industrial food, which makes their bodies a window into the older pattern. Strassmann didn't estimate. She counted. For 736 nights in a row, she recorded which women were menstruating, and she logged 550 separate menstrual onsets. What she found is startling by our standards. A Dogon woman in the thick of her childbearing years, roughly ages 20 to 34, averaged barely more than 1 period a year. Not 1 a month. Barely 1 a year. Not because she was unwell, but because she was almost always either pregnant or breastfeeding. Across her whole life, she'd give birth 8 or 9 times, and she'd end up with something in the neighborhood of 100 periods, total. Around 100 against our 400, and a foraging woman eating less and moving more may have had even fewer. So the picture flips. For most of the human story, a period wasn't the rule that pregnancy interrupted. Pregnancy and nursing were the rule, and a period was the exception that showed up in the gaps. Hold on to that because it reshapes everything that comes next. If bleeding was rare, then the whole apparatus we associate with it, the products, the schedules, the secrecy, was a much smaller part of a woman's life than we assume. But this raises the obvious question. Why so few? What was actually holding those periods back? 3 things kept ancient periods rare, working together. The first is when it started. In a modern country, the average girl gets her first period. The word for that is menarche, at around age 12. Among the hunter-gatherer groups anthropologists have studied, the average clusters closer to 16. Though honestly, estimates for the truly deep past range more widely than that. And anyone who gives you one exact number is guessing. Call it several extra years, right at the front, with no cycling at all. Why later? Because a body needs to cross a certain threshold of stored fat before it can start ovulating. That's the body's way of checking whether there's enough energy on hand to build a child. A girl living an active foraging life on a lean wild diet simply reaches that threshold later. And even once periods begin, they don't immediately settle into a reliable rhythm. There's a stretch of a few years. Anthropologists call it adolescent subfecundity, where cycles are irregular and often don't release an egg at all. So the real start of fertility might not arrive until 18, 19, 20. The second thing is pregnancy itself. When you're carrying a child for 9 months, you don't menstruate. In a world without contraception where children were survival, extra hands and care for you in old age, women spent a huge share of their fertile years pregnant. Every one of those pregnancies is 9 months with no period. The third thing is the quiet one, and it's the biggest. Breastfeeding. An ancient mother didn't nurse for a few months. She nursed each child for 3, sometimes 4 years, and she nursed often. Small feedings all day and through the night, because there was no soft weaning food to hand a baby. And that near constant nursing does something to the body. The hormones it releases suppress ovulation. It's a natural built-in spacing between children, and while it's running, periods usually stop entirely. The technical name is lactational amenorrhea, and it's not a rare quirk. For most of human history, it was the main reason families didn't have a baby every single year. Back among Strassmann's Dogon, this is the single biggest reason those 20 to 34-year-old women barely menstruated at all. They were nursing almost continuously for most of 2 decades. Stack those together, later start, years of pregnancy, years of nursing, and you can see how a lifetime collapses from 400 periods to 100. The body wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it evolved to do. In the world, it evolved for. Our 400 is the strange number, not their 100. So periods were rare. But rare isn't never. When one did come, a woman still had to deal with it, which brings us to the question everyone actually clicked for. The short answer is whatever the land offered. Soft, absorbent, close at hand. Moss especially. Sphagnum moss can hold many times its weight in liquid and even has mild antiseptic properties, which is why it turns up as a wound dressing too. Grass, sea sponges on the coast, folded animal hide, and later, washable cloth. But here's where I have to be careful, and I'd rather be honest than confident. For the deep past and the Ice Age, the Stone Age, we have almost no direct evidence of what women actually used. And that's not a coincidence. Think about what these things would have been. Moss, grass, a folded pad of soft plant fiber, a scrap of animal hide. Every one of those materials rots. They don't fossilize, they don't survive tens of thousands of years in the soil. The tools we do find from that era are stone and bone precisely because stone and bone last. The stuff of daily life for women, made of leaves and skin and cloth, simply dissolved back into the ground. So how do we know even that much? We reason from 2 directions. We look at what recent hunter-gatherer and traditional peoples used, studied by anthropologists, and we look at the earliest societies that left written records. Put together, they sketch a consistent picture, one we're partly inferring, and I'll own that. The regional flavor is real, or at least widely reported. Roman women using wool, folded paper in Japan, vegetable fibers in parts of Indonesia, grass across equatorial Africa, moss or soft hide among some indigenous North American groups. Different plants, same idea, invented independently everywhere. Because the problem is universal even when the solution is local. Now, you'll hear 2 specific facts repeated constantly about this, and I want to flag both, because this is exactly where honest history parts ways with the copy-paste version. The first is ancient Egypt. You'll read over and over that Egyptian women used tampons made of softened papyrus, and that this is recorded in an old medical text called the Papyrus Ebers. from around the 15th century before the Common Era, roughly 3,500 years ago. It's a great story. It might even be true, but it's worth knowing that it's more widely repeated than firmly proven. The claim gets passed from article to article with a confidence the original evidence doesn't quite earn. So file it as plausible, not certain. The second myth is a better lesson. You'll hear that the Greek physician Hippocrates described tampons made of lint wrapped around a small piece of wood back in the 5th century before the Common Era. This one shows up absolutely everywhere. The problem is when scholars actually go looking in the Hippocratic writings, that instruction for handling menstruation isn't really there. The confusion seems to come from a single Greek word, modos. Modos meant a lint dressing, the kind you'd pack into a wound. But in later dictionaries, the same word also got glossed as tampon. So a wound dressing quietly became a menstrual product through a translation error, and that error got repeated for a couple of thousand years until it sounded like established fact. I bring this up not to nitpick, but because it's the whole game. A confident, specific, ancient-sounding claim, a named physician, a named material, a precise century, can be built on almost nothing but a mistranslation that nobody stopped to check. Half the ancient people did this exact thing. Facts you'll ever hear are shakier than they sound. The honest answer is usually smaller, and it's usually, we're inferring, and here's from what. Okay, we've covered the body and the materials, but there's a whole other half to this story, and it's the part that had the most surprising emotional shape. In a lot of cultures all around the world, a menstruating woman didn't stay in the family home. She went somewhere separate, often a small, dedicated structure, a menstrual hut. You find these across South Asia, across sub-Saharan Africa, across parts of Oceania and Indonesia. They were usually simple, grass, mud, thatch, and peat, and often temporary, shallow dug and brush built, sometimes even burned down after use. One cross-cultural survey of the anthropological record found some form of menstrual seclusion or taboo in close to a third of the societies it sampled. Now, the easy story here is oppression. The blood is called impure or dangerous, the woman is banished. End of chapter. And in plenty of cases, the framing genuinely was fear. The belief that a menstruating woman could spoil a crop, or sour milk, or weaken a hunter. Some of the things men wrote down about menstruation in text after text are just fantasy dressed as fact. But the lived reality was more complicated. And this is the part I don't want to flatten. Because when you actually ask women in these society, and anthropologists have, the seclusion is not always experienced as punishment. For some, that hut was the one place a man could not follow. No cooking, no hauling water, no field labor, no demands. A few days every so often of enforced rest and the company of other women. Some describe it less as banishment and more as a retreat. I don't want to romanticize that because it cuts both ways. Forced seclusion can also be isolating, unsafe, and humiliating. And in some places, it still is. The honest point is just that the same institution could be a cage for one woman and a refuge for another, sometimes in the very same village. And any version that hands you only the villain or only the sanctuary is leaving half of it out. And Strassmann's Dogon work adds one more twist that I love, because it's so unsentimental. In that community, the huts weren't primarily about impurity at all. By requiring women to visit the hut when they bled, the community could see at a glance who was menstruating and who wasn't. And that told them something bigger: who was pregnant and roughly when. The hut was an information system. It broadcast the community's reproductive status honestly, out in the open. Whatever people said the taboo was about, what it actually did was keep everyone's biology legible to everyone else. So the hut is not one thing. It's fear and rest and social bookkeeping, all wearing the same grass roof. Let's come back to the silence because it's the honest heart of this whole subject. We can reconstruct Ice Age diets from tartar on fossil teeth. We can tell what tools a person made, what animals they hunted, sometimes what they died of. And yet on this, an experience shared by half of every human population that has ever existed, the archaeological record is almost blank. There are only a handful of candidates, and they show you how thin the evidence is. In the Pandorale Valley of Washington State, archaeologists reported a structure about 3 meters across, burned, with no hearth inside, that closely resembles the menstrual huts known from later peoples. It might be exactly that. It might not. That's about as good as the deep past gets. For anything more solid, you have to jump all the way forward to relatively recent history. In a cesspit in Leicester, England, dated to between about 1500 and 1650 in the Common Era, archaeologists found strips of linen, clouts they were called, along with the copper pins that held them in place, and traces of medicinal plants. That's one of the clearest physical fingerprints of menstrual practice we've yet recovered, and it's from 500 years ago, not 50,000. Why the blank? Partly it's the materials. Cloth and moss and plant remedies rot. But partly it's us. For a very long time, the people deciding what counted as history, what was worth digging for and writing down, simply didn't consider this worth the ink. We have museums full of spear points and sword hilts. We have shelves of scholarship on Roman roads. And on the single most universal bodily experience of half our species, the record was left to quietly decay. Not just because the moss dissolved, but because nobody thought to ask. So, how did ancient women handle their periods? Far less often than we do, first of all. That's the fact to walk away with. The 400-period lifetime is a modern invention, a side effect of small families, short nursing, and long lives. For nearly all of human history, a woman bled rarely because she spent her fertile years pregnant and nursing. And that alone quietly rewrites what we think of as normal. And most of it we've lost. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was made of soft things and done by people the record wasn't built to remember, which is maybe the most human part of the whole story. The thing that half of everyone did for hundreds of thousands of years left almost no trace, and we're only now bothering to look for it. If you want to know what was really going on before us, this is exactly the kind of quiet, ordinary, universal thing worth digging back up. I'm glad you dug it up with me today.